I love ideas around scale, right? You know, like we can see the Voyager spacecraft zooming out billions of miles that doesn't even leave our solar system. You know, the size of us on Earth, we can't even be seen, right? Individually. The size of Earth in the solar system, if you zoom out enough to look at to have all the planets in the same frame, you can't really see Earth any longer, right? So, and then just the number of when we look up at the sky and we think we see stars, just knowing that most of the things we think are stars are actually galaxies, and that when each of those galaxies are hundreds of billions of stars, just like the one that we're so excited about when it rises every morning. I just love that because it puts into such stark focus the miracle of our lives, right?
I find myself during the course of the last 3.5, 4 years of doing this podcast, I find myself watching an awful lot of TED Talks, and your terrific TED Talk popped up a couple of weeks ago, and it was really amusing. You really enjoy the act of presenting and sharing your knowledge. And what I thought was particularly amusing was the story, the anecdote in this particular TED Talk that you gave about proposing to your now wife. And
Yes.
you met this woman in college. And can you give us a brief synopsis of that proposal and why your wife's response was so significant at the time?
Yeah. Okay. Well, this was before the phrase friend zone was a thing, but I got friend zoned at a phase of my life in a state of infatuation with a beautiful, kind, smart woman. And I had some rough edges to work out still. And I was busy working them out in college. So that I think that's the excuse for why I was in the friend zone. I was no big catch. So there's another story actually, even preceding the proposal, where I had to confront who I was and the idea that if I wanted to have splendid people in my life, I needed to be better. I need to be a better person, right? So there was a little bit of a gut check to go on, and so we've been dating for 4 years. I kind of followed her out to Oregon on the west coast of the United States to go to graduate school, and there'd been some twists and turns along the way, but we come to love that scenery, the old growth forest with moss and ferns, and the very stormy coast with big waves, high winds, and some beaten down sand and things like that. And so I had this opportunity to use a friend's little family cabin out at this beautiful beach out in Oregon called Manzanita Beach. And um, so I fully expected this was going to be very, very smooth. So I spent my time writing a little proposal script. Um, I, I, I'm not great at memorizing things, but I did pretty good with this script. And we'd even window shop for rings. I put it all together. I had all the pieces in play. And I really had in my mind that I wanted her to be able to open a clamshell and be able to find the ring sort of nestled in it. So I'd actually taken two unconnected clamshells that I found on a different trip and taped them together, and then also taped a little just cotton ball in there and put the ring inside that, and I had that kind of in my pocket. And so theoretically, I presented to her. She'd see the ring, she'd swoon with love. I'd be reciting my beautiful and persuasive pitch, and we'd enjoy the rest of the weekend. And instead, as I'm kneeling before her in the sand, and she's kind of hunched over out of the wind because it was quite a windy day at the beach. And I'm going through this speech, and I wrap up with, would you marry me? And she says, "Shit, I don't know." And I just was floored by that. I didn't really know what to make of it at the time. And, I've got a little bit of a neurotic brain, so it went in a lot of different directions at once. Of course, I was full of recriminations about myself for not having made a better speech. I never think I can write well enough. I thought, well, maybe I'd read the signs wrong. I thought, how am I going to get the money back on this ring? I thought all sorts of things, right? But one of the other things I thought was like, wow, this is really a big deal, actually, this moment. How could she ever know? Why do I think I know? Like I'm essentially asking and pledging in a state of sort of infatuation and love and excitement and social scripts and all these sorts of things. I'm pledging something I really can't understand, and I'm asking her to do the same. Like every moment of the rest of her life, I'm asking for, and I'm saying I can give the same. And so there was that pause. Then she said, "Are you sure? Do you want to marry me?" And I said, "That's not how this works. You're supposed to. I've already said this. I had a whole speech, got this little shell. Look, I built it. It opens and closes. That's how you found the ring." And uh, so eventually she said yes, and yes, of course, which I thought was maybe ironic at the time. But but yeah, so my mind is always trying to figure out like how does this relate to what we're here on earth for? How does this relate to how we build meaning? And so I can't ever just have a moment like that and think, oh, that was just funny. I'm so happy. I couldn't have asked for a better response. It makes the story so much funnier. That I don't know if anyone else who's heard that in response to their marriage proposal. So I feel lucky in that way. But plumbing that experience for what was I really asking for? Like that was something that I still hold with me from that moment.
In that same speech of that TED talk, you went on to remark on humanity's place in the universe. We're a tiny speck in infinite nothingness, you said. And I was reminded of that amazing photograph. You're probably familiar with it. It's called the Tiny Pale Blue Dot. It was taken by, I think, the Voyager spacecraft from a distance of about 4 billion miles looking back towards Earth. This was taken about 30 years ago. And in that photograph, you can see just tiny pixels that represent Earth, where everything that we know about civilization, all of our lives and our individual lives, everything that amounts to them is associated with that tiny speck, that pale blue dot. It blows my mind, and it puts, I think, our life and our lives into perspectives.
There's that great Carl Sagan narrative over that image and setting the stage for what might be the central drama of our individual humanity, right? Like how do we know things like that and still not only crave but fully invest in meaningful lives with all our hearts and all our spirits, all our efforts, because I love ideas around scale, right? Like we can see the Voyager spacecraft zooming out billions of miles that doesn't even leave our solar system. The size of us on Earth, we can't even be seen, right? Individually. The size of Earth in the solar system, if you zoom out enough to have all the planets in the same frame, you can't really see Earth any longer, right? So, and then just the number of when we look up at the sky and we think we see stars, just knowing that most of the things we think are stars are actually galaxies, and that in each of those galaxies are hundreds of billions of stars, just like the one that we're so excited about when it rises every morning. I just love that because it puts into such stark focus the miracle of our lives, right? Like it's easy to feel beaten down by the fact that in almost any spot of land on Earth, someone has walked there 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. That we're just like when you look back into even just human time, we're such a small part of what's happened on this planet, and yet we still somehow manage to put together lives that feel profound, that bring us in contact with things that feel sacred, that feel like we can be connected to each other, that feel like we have a place in the universe, despite that place necessarily being almost impossible to actually measure in size. I think it's just amazing. It makes it feel more special that we live in the way that we do.
You have lots of books behind you there. Can I suggest or recommend a book to you? You may already be familiar with this author. His name is Matt Haig, and he wrote a terrific book called Reasons to Stay Alive. Now Matthew is an
Hmm.
author, but he also struggled with depression and suicidal ideation. And in this book, he lists all of the tiny little, seemingly insignificant things that he would encounter on a day to day basis that he imbued with value and significance and importance, and that he would remind himself of in his darker moments. I'm talking about things as simple and as beautiful as the smell of the air after a rainfall, or the yellowing of the pages of a book because of the sun, or the texture of a loved one's skin. Um, can you talk to me about how to value those seemingly insignificant things and give them significance?
Yeah, I mean that really resonates personally with me. I think part of my part of my personal journey out of where whatever holes I dug for myself earlier in my life to feeling reasonably well placed in psychologically within my skin and my mind was stumbling on or taking serious, I guess I should say, one of the tritest statements you can ever hear: stop and smell the roses. And usually I would be pissed at someone who planted the roses there because it was inconvenient for me, or I thought roses are overrated. It's just part of, the man telling me what I need to buy next, for all the blah, blah, blah. Like I would just rant on in my own mind about everything I encountered. And the idea that there's so much beauty around us, and I could appreciate some beauty, and some beauty would enrage me, right? Like the beautiful landscapes that we were destroying, that would enrage me. Beautiful creatures that we were slaughtering or poisoning or whatever it might have been. But me changing my relationship to beauty, right, of all shapes and sizes, and really savoring those the ability of the sensual world, which oftentimes gets cast in such a insignificant or maybe even craven light. But the fact that you can be awakened on such a deep level if you allow yourself to be awakened by simple, simple, simple things. Just in part, I think that links to meaning because it reinforces being alive, right? It reinforces feeling like it's worthwhile. Yeah. I mean, if you're especially attuned to what the texture of a book page feels like, or the way that frost grew on the window that morning, you may also be extra tuned to what it feels like to have unsatisfied longing or miss someone that you're grieving, right? You may be more attuned to the painful experiences as you grow more attuned to the sort of beautiful, simple experiences, but that is more of life. Like you're more in life and you're more invested in life, I think, when you can really open yourself up to those simple invitations to realize you're a living creature experiencing all of this right now. And that's pretty amazing, especially when that now can be filled with beautiful scents or beautiful flavors or visions. And yeah, I think so. I really love that idea that um, it can remind us at the very least that there's value, there's something worth trying to live for it, even if it doesn't always feel like the living side is always as easy as we wish.
I love your observation. Purpose is an anchor we throw out into the future. Can you talk to me about what you mean by this?
Yeah, and from a meaning standpoint or an existential standpoint, one of our biggest tasks is to sort of constantly be living with both a past and a present, of course, but also a future, and that our past is alive right now, our future is alive right now. So purpose is this idea that um, we can live for future things. I think that's nothing new, right? We have goals, we have aims, we have hopes, dreams, wild wishes. We have all those things where the future holds something to us. But purpose is really about making sure you're linked to that future, that future is part of how you're going to make your decisions today. It's part of how you're going to have your experiences informed, or even how you decide what to do. So the idea that we throw an anchor into the future, the anchor is a symbol of stability in some sense, and purpose can give the future a sense of stability that without purpose, who knows what's coming, right? And there's enough chaos and uncertainty in the world already that if we don't feel like we're working towards something solid in the future itself just ends up being kind of pretty scary or remote or even unimportant. And from a meaning standpoint, living as if the future is unimportant is really difficult to do, if not ill-advised. So that there's another form of stability that comes. The reason why I chose that anchor is that um, that rope that comes with it, right? So if we throw the anchor, you never just throw an anchor and then watch it go. There's always the assumption that there's something that ties you to where the anchor rests. And if something ties us to the future, then there's always one more thing to live for, because as bad as today might be, as grueling as the experience that you're having right now is, you've already seen something in the future that's worth holding on to. So that was really where the that image came to my mind about, if we can throw an anchor to the future, that not only gives us a shot at, you know, having a past that we can enjoy or still be working through depending on where we're at in our journeys. We can still have a present that's going to be full of beauty and fun moments as well as struggle, but we can also have a future that's alive for us right now, and that is something that we can somehow live the future in the present moment.
What is the relationship between finding purpose and the concept of significance?
Well, so there's three ideas that current meaning in life researchers and theorists feel are beneath the big umbrella of meaning. So meaning is a broader term. It's a it's a wildly promiscuous term. It shows up in all sorts of unruly ways as a word. It's one of the burdens of being a meaning researcher is you find yourself saying things like, "What I mean when I say meaning is," and you feel very, very silly. But to try to define it a little bit more precisely, we tend to think of meaning as what kind of cognitive operations or reflections are people performing when we ask them about meaning, right? This gets us out of the trap of trying to debate whether the universe as a whole has a meaning, and those sorts of things. So what we tend to see people doing is performing three kinds of decisions. One is about which we just talked about, purpose, right? So this idea I've got very important, overarching, highly motivating life missions or goals or aims, something motivating me to act towards the future. The second one maybe is this idea of coherence, and that is the sense that we can make sense of life. We understand and can integrate our past, presents, and potential futures. We could maybe even tell kind of like a life story or narrative from our lives. We know our place in the world. We understand other people and have rules that or master schemas that we would use to anticipate life to make it predictable and consistent. And then significance is the newest dimension that we're sort of exploring right now. It's in some cases related to the sense that we matter. That some people argue we can matter to the entire universe. Every life matters in some way, so my life can matter. Other people argue that we can matter to other people or to groups, that we serve a role in society and matter in that way. Significance really tries to capture the sense that life is worth living, that my life has inherent value. And it really is kind of the answer to Matt Haig's book, but also Camus' persistent question for philosophy. Why don't we, like, what answer does philosophy give us for why we don't all just off ourselves, right? When things get hard, like, what is there about life that gives us reasons to keep going? And so significance gives us that reason. Life is worth living. It's not worth abandoning in that sense. So there's a lot of things that can pack into what gives us a sense of significance. I usually think of it in terms of appreciation and connection. So when we're building a sense of significance, we can appreciate those elements of life like Matt Haig did, right? The little beautiful moments, or we can feel connected to something, connected to other people, connected to a culture, connected to an art form, connected to the universe or nature. And ideally, those things can develop on their own. All three of those buckets, in some sense, could develop. All three of those buckets could develop independently. You could be a very purpose-driven person. You like to get things done. You could be a very coherence-driven person. You like to figure things out and just know where everything is in its place in the universe. You could be a really significance-oriented person and really just be absorbed in life and connected to other people and sense mattering that way. So one answer to your question is that there doesn't have to be a relationship, but the best case scenario, as far as we understand, is that all three of those concepts would overlap. So my understanding of who I am and what is out there in the world would give me a sense of purpose, right? Like I know what I can do well. I know that I might want to fix some problems out in the world or expand on some goods out in the world. And by being able to do that and feel a sense of personal engagement in that future purpose, that will fill me with a sense of mattering, right? Like I have a function in this world. The world would be worse without me. Therefore, my life is significant. So they kind of ideally all work together.
A lot of people in the self improvement space say that if you can't find your purpose, well, then follow your passion, and then this will lead to your purpose. Do you agree with this?
Right. It might lead to your purpose. I think I agree with Viktor Frankl, who was in a sense agreeing with John Stuart Mill. Mill talking about happiness, that if you don't feel happy, whatever you do, don't try to pursue happiness harder. And Frankl said the same thing about meaning and purpose. If your life doesn't feel meaningful or purposeful, don't set as a goal, I'm going to get more meaning and more purpose. It's just too difficult. Instead, we need to engage and commit ourselves to doing things that matter to us. So passions can call to us as something that feels worth doing, that feels rewarding to do. One of the nice things about passions also is that if it's a true passion, we'll typically want to do it a lot over time, which then fills us with a bunch of experiences that we can draw meaning from. And maybe that becomes a purpose. A lot of people can turn their passions into a purpose, but there's other ways to start as well. One way is to start with your values, for example. Take a little time. What are really and truly your values? Like, what do you stand for, and what would you never stand for? And can you make more space for acting on those values in ways that don't tread on other people's lives or rights? Then you might find purpose that way. uh, Engaging just more consciously. Like you can use awareness in your present life to see where your purpose might lie. What catches your attention? What gets you craving another experience like that? And then, try to do a little bit more of it. So I think purpose is fun to experiment with, and we want to start from a source of strength, and that could be psychological strengths, or those could be like the kinds of things like passions that we already are enjoying doing. The only caveat I would add is that most people um, seem to do best when somehow their purpose serves a greater good than their own amusement. So, not that people's passions wouldn't serve some greater good, but that's always one question you can ask yourself if you want to plumb an experience or passion for purpose is in what ways could this be grown or expanded so that it benefits either other people or other life outside of myself.
You were quoting Viktor Frankl there. If I can throw a quote at you from an unlikely source, J.D. Rockefeller, he said that singleness of purpose is essential for success in life, regardless of what your aim is. Is purpose closely linked to success at the individual level, do you think? And I don't mean materially, but I mean from a goals and a fulfillment and a thriving standpoint.
Yeah, the research on purpose is really has really exploded over the last 10 years. And it's really hard to pick good studies anymore because there are hundreds coming out all the time. And the what I challenge people to do sometimes is just, you ask me, what variable are you interested in meaning and purpose predicting? And I'll tell you if I've seen an article about it. If not, I'll go on Google Scholar and find it in a couple minutes. It's just it doesn't we don't want to we want to be cautious and say that this is almost always based on aggregated data, where we bunch together a bunch of people and we do statistics, and there's always outliers on either end who defy our expectations. And if you're one of those outliers, it's okay. You don't have to feel guilty if purpose hasn't lit your fireworks alive yet. But the research on average shows that for most people, we make a strong prediction that those who have as your sense of purpose increases and as your commitment to and enactment of your purpose increases, you'll experience equally rising well-being, physical health, reduction in illnesses, reduction in risk of mortality. You'll be more productive at work. You'll feel happier working longer hours to be better able to set and pursue goals. Your if you broaden that out to look at meaning more generally, we see that people's relationships are better, their communication is better, they're more liked, like more well liked by strangers, for example. They have a sense of meaning. So if you think of success as health, happiness, and good relationships, there's quite a lot of evidence of it. Um, in terms of a direct causal link between meaning or purpose in life and like occupational success, there is some evidence, but a lot of that work turns into the meaningful workspace, or purpose at work, which is, I don't know if that if I don't know if that one's caught on quite as much yet, but meaningful work research does also strongly suggest that, whether it's an organization or a team or an individual level, the more meaningful work there is going on, the greater the profitability, productivity, better teamwork, trust in management, commitment to the organization, commitment to the career, all those sorts of things.
So there is a direct line then between finding meaning, purpose, and significance in our levels of satisfaction with our life, our contentedness, and our state of happiness.
Yes, and with our health, there's longitudinal research looking at meaning predicting, down the road, and same with purpose, predicting down the road, cognitive decline among older folks, heart disease, um, how long people live. I mean, some pretty good things, right? Including happiness. There's a lot of two-way arrows in these stories, as I'm sure you're well aware, right? So there's a lot of like virtuous circles. If you have good relationships, if you were raised by loving parents, if you have great, sibling relationships, you might feel a greater sense of meaning already because you've been demonstrated to be significant to somebody and you matter to somebody. So then maybe you've got a stronger sense of meaning and you're better in relationships. Maybe you develop a sense of meaning that makes you happier, that happiness makes it easier to find meaning and strengthen meaning later on. So, um, I'm reluctant to say there's just one arrow, but almost every time they study it, they show at least some influence of meaning towards later levels of happiness or health.
It's an unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Why do you think humans have always been so fixated on searching for meaning and for purpose? Is it a frustrating byproduct of consciousness, essentially?
Well, I'll dispute the term frustrating, but I do think that, um, I, I love the magic in life and I love the mystery and wonder. And I also like parsimonious, explanations. So in my way of thinking about it, one of the key elements of a search for meaning is asking, why is this happening? And part of that question is it's really hard to avoid thinking that there's a not just a reason behind it, but kind of an intention behind it. Right. So I think some of our earliest wonderings, if we look back at, one of my favorite things to talk about, which is the tale of Gilgamesh. This is a 3,600-year-old story that still exists in our present day on these clay tablets. Gilgamesh doesn't necessarily say, why is life so meaningless? But there's just meaning struggles and meaning crises rife within that. And that story, as a lot of early stories are, essentially put the difficulties in the hands of the gods, right? It's the gods that are messing with us. Why did this happen? Because you didn't make a big enough sacrifice. If you read the the Iliad, for example, literally every event that happens in the Iliad is because someone, pleaded better to the gods, or the gods were irritated with each other, right? So that sense that we look at the world and wonder who did this as part of, or what did this as part of, why did this happen? There's a interesting article. I don't know how much has been cited, but maybe from 2003, by someone named Jesse Baring, called The Existential Theory of Mind, that tried to push this idea. And I just found it really attractive that we have developed this incredibly complex cognitive apparatus for understanding deep knowledge from the subtlest of cues. Like if we think about facial expression, personal relationships, the types of information we're constantly gleaning and processing with our overgrown brains. Like let's just say that our brains, the main reason they're so big is just to process social information. And you can argue that that's a pretty complex task. Well, why wouldn't we use those same modules of cause and effect guessing at intention, guessing at identity and personality. Why wouldn't we use those same processing programs in a sense to try to understand why are the seasons happening? Why is there a wildfire? Why is the weather like this? Why did this child die of the spider bite and this child eats spiders all day long, right? Like, like I think that feels persuasive that we have this huge cognitive capacity. Maybe consciousness is a byproduct of it, maybe meaning is a byproduct of it, but we're really good, really, really good. So good we can't stop ourselves from drawing inferences or making meaning, if you will, from all the sorts of things that happen in our lives.
You have said that you expressed concern about the commodification of meaning. What do you mean by that?
So I've been involved in positive psychology in one way or the other since about 2001. And, as a wide-eyed grad student wanting to figure out how to be a good researcher someday, and then watching, best-selling books appear on the marketplace. And, a lot of them are done by scientists, not all of them. And a lot of them, the ones I read, feel um, like they way overpromise things and they way reduce things into secrets, keys, steps, metaphors that will solve all your problems. And it just feels very like every book indicates to some degree that if you just read this book, if you just go to this workshop, if you just attend this lecture, if you just hire this consultant, you'll have a pretty quick and easy way of solving every single one of life's most tricky problems. And that doesn't work, right? There's no research that suggests that for most people, any one thing with a minimal amount of effort is going to change one's life. I mean, it does sometimes, but it's that's hard to create a program around. So what happens then, I thought was happening was that more books were needed. So um, and the pressure, like, so I've submitted a couple uh, let me just say this. I know folks who have given me feedback on stuff if I wanted to write a book. And the feedback typically is, well, you need to, what are the three keys? What are the five takeaways? What are the six secrets? What are the, like what can you promise the reader will experience when they buy this book? And the for me, meaning has resisted that because for up till now, because what you really can promise them if you want to work with them around meaning is that they're going to think a lot and they're going to have a lot of questions and you're going to hopefully help them find and learn ways to both live with those questions, ask better questions, and develop a system for answering those questions that they can keep using. And that's really different than, okay, here's how you're going to find your meaning, and then you're set, right? So, because our lives change so much, and because meaning at its heart is trying to understand what's happening to us now and project that into the future, there's never going to be a single answer, I don't think, for that many of us. There are certainly going to be single answers for some. So in my mind, meaning then is necessary because of its complexity. It's necessary because it asks us to engage a little bit more rather than just quickly check things off of a list. That I don't know how long that can resist. Also, the another thing about meaning is that meaning is inherently self-transcendent, right? So meaning, as we dive into the literature and the research and the wisdom around meaning, it's always asking us to look a little bit further from ourselves, to grow ourselves so that we're encompassing the stakes of others around us. So it's kind of anti-selfish in that way. And if there's, so I want it to be complex. I want it to be a process that unfolds over time. And I want it to be something that pulls us out of our own concerns and urge for gratification into what bigger role can we play in health and wellness of as large of a circle as we care to draw in the world around us. And so that's all opposite to the commodification of the happiness industry that I sometimes see, where it's all about promising more. It's all about coming up with a catchy hook. It's all about moving on to the next thing. I see a lot. I've seen this a lot in people. They've gone through. Um, let's let's just pick something. that isn't really on the radar. But let's say they've gone through a hugging workshop. Hugging is going to be the next big happiness, well-being construct. I don't know if maybe I'm already too late to this, but if not, I'm trademarking it right now. But it's like you can hug your way to happiness, and there's a world leader in hugging, and that person charges 30 grand for a keynote. And then there's other people who are just good huggers, and there's other people who've been like working their whole lives to perfect how to teach people to hug effectively. And with the mindset that this is going to fix me quick, you'll go to a hugging workshop and you're like, that felt great. I'm going to buy the book. Oh, this is even better. Then you meet someone who's like, oh, but you didn't get the hugging with the hugging master at their hugging summit, right? And it's all then it just sort of pushes people to the next thing. Like, I need the next thing. Okay, hugging's done. Hugging's done. No one talks about hugging anymore. It's like job satisfaction. No one talks about that. No one talks about work engagement. We need a new shiny thing. And we're going to treat it the exact same way and want instant results with minimal effort. And we'll trust the person who charges the most to give us the answers. And I think that would be really corrosive to meaning. So that's my rant.
Well, it's a very honest rant because you're probably perfectly placed to be able to write a really interesting tome, never mind a book on the subject of meaning. But I suppose what you've said there, and what I can take from what you've said, is that somebody's search for meaning is a lifelong journey that can't be distilled down into bullet points in a book.
It can't be distilled down into bullet points, but there are fantastic books and tomes to be written on the topic. They probably just won't sell very much. And I'm working on one right now that's really focusing on the research first and also the complexity. But there's other folks who've done really, really nice work out there. And, part of it is that if we think back to Viktor Frankl, which is really where the modern story of meaning starts, Frankl was a psychiatrist, right? Even as he was developing his theory before the monumental tragedy of the Holocaust, which became probably the focal point of what most people remember from his book Man's Search for Meaning. But even before that, he had this theory, and he was inspired by people like Nietzsche. That which does not kill me makes me stronger. Those who have a why can endure anyhow. Um, but really, Frankl's interest was in healing people with purpose, in addressing suffering, in living in a place of suffering. And then the Holocaust happens and millions are being murdered and all these horrible things occur. And Frankl lives through this and he sees purpose and meaning in just unimaginable suffering. And so part of meaning is different then from a lot of the happiness constructs, at least for the people who have been in it for a long time, because I too, other than like almost always wondering, looking at the Milky Way and wondering, like, how can my life be important if that thing is so huge and doesn't care, right? Like, I've always been kind of like a stargazer and a wonderer of those questions. But my first encounters with meaning were in the therapy world. And I think that's a lot of people's first encounters with meaning are when they lose a loved one or when they have a trauma or when something per, monumentally perplexing happens in the world. They can't figure it out. So the space of struggle is part of the story of meaning. So I think that's trickier to tell a story about that in a book where you realize that I realize my story of struggle and pain is might be entertaining for people, but their story also needs exploration. So really, it's I think writing a good book about meaning, for anyone who's interested, is in a sense writing a good book about questions and how to be okay with sitting with questions. Because in one sense, the search for meaning is, you could think of it as, how intense are your questions today? Right? If you're searching for meaning, those questions are like in your face, screaming at you. And when you're not searching for meaning, it's because those questions are just like, they're like nice background noise of your favorite pub or coffee shop. So I think that's the central dynamic. How do we live with the okayness of not always knowing and not always having an answer for the question, but that's part of our experience too.
But doesn't that quest for answers and meaning and purpose, does that not lead to the frustration that I spoke about earlier? Certainly, my own frustration with not being able to obtain the answers that I look for, and for many people, their struggle with looking for those answers and finding those answers leads them to cope then in different and very often destructive ways.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. You're right in that. There's some cultural differences that are interesting. So part of my work was developing a scale that measures meaning in life, but also the search for meaning. And it's the most used questionnaire for meaning in the world. So we get a chance to see lots of interesting data come through on it. And the data on having meaning are unanimous, right? It's like you can't find a place where when people say my life is meaningful, they don't look better off than someone who says my life is meaningless. That feels universal, but the search for meaning looks really different. I think we're only beginning to really explore why this is. But if you run a search for meaning scale in Japan, for example, versus Ireland or the US, you're going to see differences in. I'll tell a quick anecdote of my first PhD student, Ju Yan Shin, who's Korean, and we would have these conversations. He's like, "Can you explain to me again why search for meaning and presence of meaning are different?" I feel like, what are you talking about? Like one you're looking for it, the other you have it. And she's like, but how can you have it if you're not looking for it? Right? Where the process is the outcome in that case. Like you couldn't have meaning unless you were thinking about meaning and meaning is looking for it and searching for it, right? It's much more of that dialectical Taoism infused worldview. Over on our side, we have like the heritage of Aristotle. I'm getting too nerdy right now, but Aristotle and Plato, like there's ideal forms and there's this and there's that and there's good and there's bad, and everything gets bifurcated into this atomistic or either or approach. So subtly under in our mindsets, particularly the longer we've been exposed to like market capitalism, the idea is that if I am looking for meaning, I must not have it, right? It's like meaning is like car keys. You don't look for your car keys if you're looking at them already. So searching for meaning feels like a failure. And also when we're driven to sort of self-construct these amazing lives that have, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and healthy, wealthy, and wise, and all these sorts of things, when we don't have some of those pieces, it feels like a personal failure, right? So, in some sense, when you look across cultures, the cultures that struggle with search for meaning are the ones where if you're searching for meaning, it means you've done something wrong, that you failed, or that if you're still asking questions, it must mean that you haven't reached the finish line yet. And when you look at cultures where search for meaning is actually positively related to well-being, you're seeing folks whose attitude is life is going to be an endless engaging quest, right? There's always going to be something to learn about myself, about life experiences. Um, Me engaging with the questions is meaningful. So I think we can take a lot of that idea from cultures that are rooted in the ability to hold opposites in the same place. So we can search for meaning and we can find meaning. And in fact, research that I've done and other folks have replicated shows that people who are high on search for meaning sometimes look anxious and depressed, but only if they don't have meaning. So if you have meaning and you have search for meaning, your odds of looking happy are the same as if you're not searching for meaning. So there's something in there, right? If we can feel like those questions are asking us to build on something and to add to some richness in our lives, probably they're gonna reinforce our well-being. But if we start to feel like those questions mean like we're inadequate, we haven't done the right things yet, our lives are empty. If I'm still asking about it, I must not believe hard enough, right? All these other sorts of negative self self-talking phrases, then it probably those almost inevitable questions are going to undermine our sense of meaning.
You mentioned some of the Greek philosophers there, Aristotle and Plato. Has our understanding and our relationship with purpose and meaning progressed in the 2,000 years since those philosophers would have been alive? Because you said there's an awful lot of research that's taken place in recent years. But do we have the progress to show for that?
Yeah, I think we do. I think more research has been done in the last 3 years than in all of human history, right? So I mean, we're living at this incredibly accelerating pace of knowledge accumulation, and it's turning its sights to really complex questions. So Aristotle and Plato, and ancient philosophers, for the most part, don't tackle the idea of meaning directly. Like in some modern translations, people will swap in words. Like even if you think about Ecclesiastes from the Jewish Tanakh or the Christian Old Testament, there's some translations have the whole book be about meaninglessness, right? Or futility or emptiness or vaingloriousness and all these sorts of things. But the translation really matters, and not all translations see Ecclesiastes as being about meaning. Same thing. I have myself read into Plato a lot of ideas about meaning, but Plato doesn't mention meaning. In fact, no one mentions meaning until the 1800s. So, in terms of the philosophy of meaning, it really didn't even start until very recently, and even modern philosophers aren't that interested in the question of what is meaning in life supposed to be like. If you want to read a cool modern philosopher who tackles this stuff, Thaddeus Metz out of South Africa really gets into what would a contemporary philosophy of meaning in life be like? What would it be grounded on? What would it say? So we've kind of taken some philosophical ideas about what makes life important and worth living, and we've implemented them in all sorts of ways in the modern well-being and positive psychology science, including meaning science. But the biggest thing that we've done is just decide to agree that every person is a wise informant about meaning in their own lives. And if that's the case, then I get to measure Mike's meaning, I get to measure Matthew's meaning, I get to measure everybody's meaning, and then ask them, what does this look like in your life? And then we start to bring all those data together, and we get what philosophers would call a normative case for meaning in life. The normative case is we know tons of stuff about it, and most people are doing pretty good on meaning from all around the world. We know that some things erode meaning. Materialism erodes meaning. Unresolved trauma erodes meaning. Social injustice erodes meaning. Phony, phony workplaces, our own internalized cynicism, those things erode meaning. But we also know a lot of things that can support meaning in broad strokes, right? Like good relationships support meaning in broad strokes, feeling socially connected to the life around us, whether that's a neighborhood or a city or a country or all of humanity, doing things for something outside of yourself, something bigger than yourself, helps support meaning. Understanding who you are and being true to your values supports meaning. Trying to be authentic, but also authentically growing into the best version of yourself, that supports meaning. So we know a lot of these things, but you can probably already see that the devil's in the details. What does it mean for me to become authentic versus you or any of your listeners right now? So that's why, in my heart of hearts, I feel like continued engagement with the question of meaning, with a lot of compassion for our capacity to struggle with this very question, is really key. And I'll say one thing that Frankl also pointed out. He was like, when you're struggling to find meaning and purpose in your life, don't grasp after it. Instead, engage yourself in good acts in your life, and meaning will ensue. So this idea that meaning ensues in a life as we're living it well, I think can take a lot of pressure off of folks to have to get that check mark on their list of parts of the good life.
My time is almost up. I've really enjoyed our conversation. If people want to find out more about you and your work, where can they go, Doctor?
I'm not super easy to track down in terms of what I put out there. I do have a little website with some of the main papers that people can download. That's michaelfsteger.com. There's a that TEDx talk that you mentioned if people want to hear about my embarrassing proposal story, and my my fondness or at least ability to have been heavily influenced by 80s romantic comedies. And I show up on LinkedIn every once in a while, and I love to give presentations and talks wherever I can. And at some point, I hope that we can have a good conversation together over a pint or something like that. That too, I've really enjoyed it as well. And I know that you asked all the questions, and I get to give most of the answers, but I'd love to turn the tables on you sometime.
Well, I'd love to do so. I've really enjoyed chatting with you today. So much value, so much knowledge in there, and so many things to think about now tonight after this conversation. But for the moment, Dr. Michael Steger, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.